Well, good morning, everyone. On behalf of Citizens for Modern Transit, I'd like to welcome you all to our quarterly Talking Transit event on what we can learn in St. Louis from developing near transit. My name is Hart Nelson. I have the honor of being the chair of Citizens for Modern Transit. In my day job, I am an Associate Vice Chancellor for Workforce Development at St. Louis Community College. Many of us have been socially distancing for the last 8 months due to COVID-19. I hope all of us have been. But while that's been going on, a lot has been happening in St. Louis with regard to transit and to development near transit. So first, I'd like to thank our partners involved in today's event, ULI St. Louis and St. Louis Realtors, represented this morning by Kelly Annis and Charlie Hinderleiter, respectively. Thanks to both of you. Second, I'd like to welcome and thank all of the CMT board members who have joined us this morning. And I'd especially like to thank CMT's Platinum and Gold sponsors and their representatives. We wouldn't be able to provide these sorts of updates without your help. Today, we highlight the development currently underway near the Fuoss Park-DeBaliviere, and Swansea transit centers. And then we're going to discuss how equitable and sustainable investments like these help create more viable communities. Panelists today include Jeff Tegethoff, operating partner of CRG, Joel Fuoss, principal of Trivers, Burnett, president of Bywater, John Hanley, Senior Managing Director of the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust, Erica Henderson, Vice President of the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership and Executive Director of the St. Louis Promise Zone, and John Lange, Vice President of Economic Development at Bi-State Development Agency. I'd now like to invite CMT's Executive Director, Kim Sella, to get us all started. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Hart, and thanks to all of you for attending today. We are really excited about this program. When we had our planning call, we had a very robust and dynamic conversation that probably could have gone on for several hours. But I think there was one statement from Burnett that really is the essence of what we're going to be talking about today when he was referring to his housing development in Swansea. People have moved into that housing development at a rapid clip because we're connected to transit, it works. And so I think that statement really sums up what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in and get started. I do want to remind all of you who are attending the webinar today, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box and we will get to those as we move through our program. But first, I'd like to start by inviting our panelists to talk a little bit about how they came to be involved in this conversation in transit-oriented development or developing near transit and in their current roles today. So why don't we go ahead and start with Erica, if you'd like to jump in, Erica.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, CMT, for the invitation to participate in today's discussion. For me, the opportunity to talk about transportation is access. And so it is access to education, to jobs, to housing, to food. And I predominantly focus on economically undervalued communities. So how do we ensure that these communities have access to transportation in a way that is intentional, it is prioritized, and it's not just your additional bus stops, but it's, you know, that type of timing that you're not there all day waiting to connect for transportation to come. And so one of the highlights that I believe that we have participated and done well is in the city of Wellston, where we have partnered to build out what we call our Wellston campus, and it's all centered around the Metro stop in the city of Wellston. So we have our business incubator that has 70 plus businesses. We have the Met Center, which is a regional job training facility, along with a child care development center, which is right across the street on the same parking lot as the Metrolink station. And we've done a lot of creative partnerships with John Lange and team at Bi-State Development to ensure that we are bringing resources to that particular station with community in mind from the beginning. So not as an afterthought, but working and building with the residents who live in community to ensure that they have, again, equitable access to transportation. So thank you for allowing me to participate today.
Thank you, Erica. Why don't we go ahead and turn it over to Aaron Burnett.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Aaron Burnett with Bywater Development Group. We focus our work primarily on affordable housing and community development. As it stands right now, we're active with developments underway in 4 states, Missouri, Illinois, South Carolina, and Kentucky. Also in pre-development kind of efforts in places we're expanding into in North Carolina and Tennessee. One of the developments that we're very fortunate to be involved in that really relates to this conversation today is our Metro Landing development that we partnered with the Southwestern Illinois Development Authority to complete at the Swansea Metrolink station. Some handful of years ago, we identified that as an optimal location for a transit-oriented development. Our first phase of development at that location, which has been completed, is a 62-unit affordable senior development, and it took place on what was considered excess property right next to the Metrolink station and the bus hub at that particular location. We worked very closely with John Langa and team at Bi-State, like Erica mentioned. And, Kim covered the vast majority of what I wanted to say about that project in terms of it being a success. People moved in. People like living there. They love being connected to transit at that location. And hopefully it stands as an anchor for additional TOD at that particular location.
Thank you, Aaron. And I'm sorry I stole your show. It was just too good of a quote not to lead with. Good morning, John. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, yes, good morning, everyone. My name is John Hanley. I work with the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust. The Housing Investment Trust is a $6.7 billion fixed income fund that invests in securities for multifamily developments, primarily in St. Louis and throughout the United States. Our mission is to provide competitive returns to our investors, but it's also to generate well-paying family supporting union jobs and also to create mixed income, affordable and workforce housing units. To be affordable, transportation really needs to come into that discussion, and that's something that we always take a look at. We have 38 projects totaling $2.4 billion that are under development throughout the country. And since many of these projects are on top of or near public transportation, we thought it would be Brendan Flynn, who is the district manager of the Labor's District Council, thought it'd be a good idea for us to bring some of the best practices that we're seeing around the country to this discussion today. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, John. Jeff?
Yeah, my name is Jeff Tegethoff. I'm one of the partners of CRG, which is the real estate development arm of Clayco. That move happened in April of this year, and prior to that, developed on my own through Pearl and Tegethoff Development. One of our legacy projects is the construction of Expo at Forest Park at the intersection of DeBaliviere and Pershing, and I've been fortunate enough to work pretty intimately with the team at Bi-State as we programmed that site. Our mission's always been to develop what we say are irreplaceable buildings and irreplaceable locations. And what we've found is through the cities that we developed in the Midwest, transportation infrastructure definitely helps to landmark a site that would fit into an irreplaceable location. So that's how I ended up getting involved in TOD type of developments.
Thanks, Jeff. And last but certainly not least, Joel, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joel Fuoss, principal at Trivers Architects here in St. Louis. Most of our work is urban centric, which is really accessible around public transit. And so fortunately, we spend a lot of time with the projects that we work on, thinking about its connectivity to the urban fabric in the greater region. We've actually been working, we had an initial proposal on this site even before we knew Jeff, probably 15 years ago at the DeBaliviere station. And it's been a long time of development there, as John Langa can probably attest to, for quite some time. So, when the opportunity came along for Jeff to pick up the baton there, we had a prior relationship working together, and it was a great fit for us to connect and bring that vision to life. I have to say it is probably aided in my understanding of TOD development, being a transit writer for a good portion of my professional life, working with Bi-State interning when I was a graduate student at Washington University, working on the cross-county extension, working with arts and transit. So, you know, I think it's helpful as a designer to think about the experience that someone is going to take, you know, in a TOD development. So that was certainly invaluable. That is something carried through. So that's a little bit of how I got into this.
Thanks, Joel. So we're going to jump right in with questions for our panelists today, but I do want to remind everyone attending the webinar, if you have a question, please feel free to put that in the chat box and we will get to your questions as quickly as possible. So we're going to start with the softball for this panel just to get them going and warm them up. But how does the immediate proximity of transit provide value to your project as developers, but also from a public sector perspective and the investor side? John, you just talked about 38 projects, $248 billion that you have invested. How does transit play a role in that? And what are the trends that you've seen in other regions in terms of TOD development that could be worthwhile to bring here to the St. Louis market? So it's pretty much a two-part question.
Okay, what we're seeing in projects around the country and projects we've invested in is really a lot of public-private partnerships working very early in the development. We're tracking one deal in a Midwest city for about 7 years to be able to get a transit site underneath our development where we would be developing underneath the transit site. So we're able to bring density to the site. We can reduce the amount of parking that's needed because of the proximity to the housing. And also we're in a situation where you can reduce the cost by having the individuals who are renting in the apartments reduce their overall cost for their families by not needing a car or not needing extra insurance for their project. So being able to work and live and play near where you live is an important feature that we look for.
Okay, great. Any other panelists want to jump in on this one? I know I heard the word parking, so I know that's going to set off alarms for Jeff, but anyone else want to jump in on this question?
Yeah, I will. You know, I think what we've learned over the last 3 years as we've explored the DeBaliviere and Pershing site, which it's, you know, although we've only been under construction for a few months, I mean, that project's been in the works for 3 years. We did a lot of best practices research across the country. We were fortunate at the time that ULI had also been doing quite a bit of TOD research, so we were able to get access to a lot of that and tour a lot of other places around the country that were successes and some that were failures, and like I said, learn best practices. I think, you know, one of the key tenets that I learned is, you know, TODs are not about just one other form of transportation. It's about multimodal transportation. And people are very willing to have an alternative mode of transportation. It's not the same for everyone. For some, it's rail, for some it's bus, for some it's the bike, for some it's pedestrian access on foot. And for some it's electric. It may be electric vehicle. It's still a vehicle, but it's an EV. So, you know, I would say that was kind of the key tenet. And as we're looking to do more of these across the country and in St. Louis, we're trying to identify marquee sites that can provide multi-modes of transportation. So residents and other folks in the community can have can make the selection on their own. And I think that's kind of the second part is, you know, these developments are not just about the people that are going to live in the buildings. It's about entire nearby immediate community as well. Because what we're providing is essentially like a trailhead for the community to use as an access point to these multi-modes of transportation. So, you know, our paradigm really shifted, and when we started designing the platform for this building and the programming, It was about not just, you start with your residents that are going to be in the building and the other potential like retail users, but you also have to think very, very conscientiously about the immediate community and how they're going to use your development and what you're doing as an asset, as a community asset as well.
Great.
I would agree, Jeff, if community don't mind. Just creating these equitable and sustainable communities is just as critically important as you think about the transportation. This is an important piece of real estate, it's community, and it's economic development. And so the model has to be inclusive of community from the beginning again. And I would just say that there's opportunities that once you start with working with the transportation organization, you have the ability to just think through a variety of opportunities. We've also thought about loans to homeowners that are in communities that want to, loans that go to potential homeowners who want to move into an area where there is transportation. So similar to Aaron's project in Swansea, where the housing project kind of was successful due to the transportation. So it's the opposite effect of when you built a new transportation, also think about the other components that can complement the deal as you move forward.
Thank you, Erica.
Yeah, and if I could add a little bit of perspective from our side, another aspect of things that shows up in our work is that the vast majority of every development that we're involved in is funded in part through a competitive process with a state housing finance agency that administers tax credits and below market loans or what have you. And for us, it becomes kind of a double bottom line kind of scenario in the sense that we know that connection to transit is important for the residents, and to make investments in those communities is important for the community. But we also have the task of going out and trying to competitively be awarded financing. And oftentimes it's, highly oversubscribed agencies, and only the best projects are going to get financed. And to be able to tell a state housing agency and other funding partners, especially from the public sector, that there is that level of coordination and connection to transit that connects people to opportunities and resources over compared to a site that doesn't have those, makes those much more attractive as well. So, for us, it starts with our own assessment of the real estate community and how our development can help create those kind of connections. But beyond that, bringing those other kind of financing partners along, that connection to transit is also very important in that universe as well.
Joel, did you want to jump in?
Sure. I'll pick up on a little bit of what Jeff had touched on, and Erica as well, as far as the surrounding community. It's our job as designers to listen to the communities. We had I think close to 14 different community sessions on the Expo project, where we were meeting with the different neighborhood groups. We had a large session at Forest Park. I think we had maybe over 100 attendees, and the trolley room was overflowing. A lot of great enthusiasm. So it's our job to listen to what people are saying, and try to incorporate that into the design. Try to think about the experience of each one of those transit riders that Jeff was talking about. Is it somebody on the bus? Is it somebody on the train? Is it somebody walking by? Is it somebody using the building? Is it somebody getting dropped off by Uber? And, is it somebody just walking down the street that lives in the neighborhood that's just walking by the building? And what do they experience in that moment? So, to the designers out there and everybody that needs to think and how to put themselves in somebody else's shoes when they're experiencing these different modes of transit, and how you're actually moving through. Sometimes it takes a little time to think through it and to listen to people out there that are actually experiencing it, and to weave that into the project is really critical.
Yeah, and piggybacking on that, Joel, I think it was really important, any transportation-oriented development in St. Louis specifically, where we haven't had a lot of them, is going to be an education process. And I would encourage everyone to be incredibly patient through that process, because it's definitely two ways of education. oftentimes in non-TOD development, when we're doing, community meetings or just knocking on doors, it's us trying to learn. It's more of a one-way street on the education process. The Expo project, we were collectively educating ourselves. I think the community, all the other stakeholders, myself as the developer, Joel as the architect, and our ultimate building design and functionality, changed quite a bit from what I think we initially envisioned could be there, as we looked at how, what Joel was touching on, like how different people are going to access that intersection. And, usually when we're developing, we're just thinking about how people are going to live in our building. It's just kind of one silo. This, we knew, like with anything, we couldn't make everybody happy, but there was, once we, I think, got into it, there was a tremendous amount of overlap in how we could provide the most functional building, not just for our residents, but for the entire community. But it was a two-way street of education, and that's not going to change. I mean, this is a fast-moving space, again, with things like the EV ready things to scooters were the hottest thing going, to when was the last time you saw somebody down the road on a scooter, to, so we're learning as we go and creating a community asset that's going to be functional for the next 20 or 30 years. I'd say, fortunately and unfortunately, we are not a build them, fill them, and flip them developer. We kind of develop to own forever. So we really had to be strategic about, what does this not just building look like 3 months after we deliver it, 3 years after we deliver it, but how are people going to interact with this asset for the next 30 years? And that was a at times a challenging problem to solve, but it was fun because it's new space, but it takes engagement from all stakeholders, everything from down to individual residents to agencies. Like, we're fortunate to have Bi-State so engaged on this project and in the city, having their engagement, to leveraging best practices that our architects have from other markets and other cities, and the development world too. So
great, thank you very much. So the next question, before we get to the next question, there has been a request in our chat box that we put links of the projects that you all are working on. And so we've offered to do that. We will put that on our website as soon as we wrap up this panel discussion this morning, so people can actually see what projects you're working on and where they're located, and some of the additional information about your projects. So what are some of the key TOD project approval and support elements that could be strengthened or altered in order to help create more products like this in the St. Louis market? What's missing? What do you need to ensure that this type of development continues? Or what was the biggest hurdle you all have encountered to date with regards to moving projects like this forward? Go ahead.
We'll cannibalize this discussion. It gets down to education again right now. I mean, I think we have to be like hyper focused on educating the market and continuing to dig deeper and dig deeper and dig deeper, and challenging our current paradigm of what we think is necessary. Again, obviously parking is a challenge because, we're developing these buildings for the future, but there's immediate problems too that you have to solve. And that there's going to be friction and conflict, but there is a lot of great data out there as we look at best practices in other markets. And then taking that data and applying it to the unique attributes of St. Louis, and then the unique attributes of the specific location. But, we're fortunate that we develop all over the country. And I would say, as we look, one of the greatest assets I think that St. Louis has, it's a huge competitive advantage, is like the MetroLink infrastructure. That would be very challenging to reproduce in today's world, in any city. But I would say education is critical. and following up with that, bringing in, you know, stakeholders, not just your traditional stakeholders, but, you know, I'd say as well, the idea, we've talked about parking, but, you know, I think the idea of affordable housing is a hot topic too. Most of these developments are going to be in urban areas that have a very broad cross-section of demographics. And, you know, we really educated ourselves on what the existing housing stock in the immediate area had. And again, that development, you know, you have multi-million-dollar homes next to, you know, a block away or two from Section 8 housing, you know, so incredible cross-section. Yeah, I mean, again, education, I think, is key.
Great. Anyone else want to jump in on this question?
I'll just add to it. I think education, exposure are both critical pieces. Jeff mentioned earlier, just engagement. I would say that to eliminate some of the hurdles, the power lies in the residents. And so really building their capacity so that they understand the benefits of the project, the opportunity that the project brings to their community, and how they can be involved and be a champion along the way throughout the entire project, and building that leadership. You also want to have that authentic approach to community. When you think about your non-traditional stakeholders, I would say start with those, because you know, all of us on here, we can connect at any time. So go into your community, your churches, your small businesses that are in the area. There are many businesses that we don't think about that are utilizing the system or that can benefit from the system, but they're just not first top of mind when we're thinking about our projects. And so I would say start from your grassroots level and then work your way up would be a great framing for your discussion. There also has to be this community equity and this benefit to them as well, so they see the value add of the project. And so I think that that's critically important when you start thinking about how it better connects them to workforce opportunities. When you think about affordable housing that can come into a community if the transportation is, you know, supporting those residents in the area. So I think it is, to Jeff's point, is that education, that exposure, and that engagement.
Great.
You know, I'll add from our perspective what we really see as an evolving success story, and it's really based on the efforts of a lot of parties that we're lucky enough to be a partner in. The Swansea side, I think, is a fantastic, you know, kind of look at how not just folks like us from the development side, but how the village of Swansea itself has taken so much of an effort and put in so much time. They've worked with a technical assistance panel from ULI to come up with a larger comprehensive plan and development plan around the rest of that particular Metrolink station. They've done a ton of engagement with the community, and they've really emerged as the leaders who are going to take one phase of development that we were lucky enough to be involved in and start to turn that into more of a sustained and mixed use, mixed income kind of development at that location. And I don't raise that as a hurdle. I raise that to say that's an example of what can happen at other locations. And that level of engagement, planning, coordination that's really been championed by the village on a local level, you know, is the type of things I think that could help really move these kind of efforts at other locations.
Great. Anyone else?
Sure. I would add that, you know, as I think Jeff mentioned earlier, that, you know, we're not building for buildings in, you know, 1 or 2 years. You know, these buildings are going to be here a while, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years longer, right? So, you know, we have to think not just the immediate future. And so we have to think beyond that. And, you know, I think for us, and an example at the Expo site specifically is that there was a form-based code overlay for the zoning code, but what has not yet been adopted. And so, you know, it was a code that had been approved by the neighborhood. Everybody had weighed in. There had been multiple sessions to, you get that out there, but it had not been adopted yet by the city. And so, I would say some of those things that, the civic side needs to keep up. The zoning codes need to reflect what, the development future looks like, and not just something that's maybe more antiquated at that point. Some things that created some a little bit of headache on that front because that those initiatives hadn't been accelerated or pushed through or finalized, and so it created a little bit of a headache. We do find the form-based codes really beneficial, and certainly in a transit site or transit-oriented sites that have perhaps a much reduced parking demand or ratio that can be taken into account, that has a significant impact on the cost of a project and really the functionality of a project. And really we need to think about what the future of parking looks like, with automated vehicles in the future and ride sharing and things like that have completely changed the individual use of parking. Our zoning codes need to start taking those things into consideration and not have something that's maybe looking even at the present. And so I think that to me was a big key and something that could go smoother in the future for certainly the city of St. Louis.
And that's something we're seeing around the country as you're trying to do more affordable housing and make the units more affordable and allow them to lease up, because that's also important for a lender. We do see parking is a big factor that's looked at early in the project. Can people commute via bike or walk versus having to have that second car? So we're doing deals on the East Coast where there's no parking required. We're doing a deal in Minneapolis where it's a 0.5-to-1 ratio between parking in the units. And in that particular project, they have a 2.5 bike storage to every unit in that case. So you are seeing in specific projects, figuring out early and working with the public sector to determine what makes sense for this site, for that community, and for that development.
So we have thank you for your answers for that one. We have some questions from our attendees, and the first one I think goes back to what Joel just talked about. The pandemic has resulted in more people working from home, reduced need for office space, and increased retail via the internet. Have these realities impacted planning for mixed-use development and reallocation of space to address the nationwide shortage of affordable housing? And I know, Joel, you touched on that you're not building for today, you're building for 30 years out, but can any of you address that question?
I'll jump on that initially here. So on the point of maybe the immediate for people that are working at home, we are finding even pre-COVID that people were working from home and remotely. And so we were weaving in these opportunities for breakout spaces, shared conference rooms, shared workspaces in our multifamily projects. So that was happening even pre-COVID, and we certainly expect it to continue. It has impacted a little bit on, there was a trend towards going to much smaller units. And I think that is probably, COVID has maybe slowed that down a little bit. People are looking for perhaps a nook or another place to have a home office that maybe wasn't on people's forefront of their minds here, a year ago or 2 years ago at this point. So that is something that we're seeing a little bit in the changing trend. In context of again, flexibility into the future, we try to take the approach of try to think ahead. We're not going to know all the answers for what's going to come into the future, but try to set up the building that it's not going to be detrimental and perhaps as reusable in the future as we can make it. I think the parking decks that we did at Expo, we've touched on this maybe prior, but the decks there, instead of a sloped condition where we park on an angle, and it was slightly more efficient, we decided to go to a flat deck. scenario. So if those needed to be converted in the future, they'd be much easier to adapt. So it's creating buildings that are much more adaptable in the future. And then it makes those buildings much more resilient in the end than they would be if they were designed towards a specific use on that front. And then lastly, on the affordable side, picking up a little bit on what John had touched on about the ownership of a car, some of these things that we're looking at, it's, per AAA, it costs over $700 a month for the average person to own a car. And so if you can put that and supplement your rent or not have to pay that and live towards it by a transit stop that you're not paying that extra dollars, you're living in a new construction where the city is keeping up with energy codes that reduce your energy bills per month. The building is EV solar ready per the new ordinance by the city of St. Louis. Will help drive down the energy costs of the building in the long term. It is EV ready as well per the new city ordinance that's being introduced currently. The bike ordinances that are woven in. So there's other sustainability measures that aren't just about affordable housing on a rental standpoint, but those monthly costs and how those add up to somebody that's living there, and how those costs really can impact them month to month.
Anyone else want to jump in on this one?
Just to add a little away from design, but a trend in that we see in our work. There's really two development types that we work on. We do affordable housing for moderate income seniors, and we do affordable housing for families who make up the workforce of communities. And I think all of us know that COVID has really exposed the challenges of those essential workers in all communities, St. Louis very much included, and the supply of high quality affordable housing options for that particular audience, I think is something that we're highly focused on, and everyone that does the same kind of work that we do. To the extent those can be connected to transit for the reasons the other panelists have laid out, I think it's even that much more benefit, to that particular audience.
Right. So from the perspective of the Economic Development Partnership, Erica, what do you think is missing from the recipe to entice more development like this in St. Louis near transit? We have John Lenga on our panel, and I'm sure John could outline how many of the 38 stations, John, or possibly a Metro bus transfer centers or other areas that are opportunities for development. But what do you view from your perspective, Erica, as missing from the successful recipe to entice more development?
I would say it's coordination. And collaboration. So we talk about it as a region, but we don't necessarily do it well, or we haven't. And I think that we're trying to move in that direction with the announcement yesterday of Greater St. Louis, new plan, with what is happening at SLDC and at the Economic Development Partnership. I think that we need to be in conversation more with our transportation partners, and then for those who go outside of St. Louis to attract business to the region, I think it's having those conversations. And we don't, we're not selling ourselves in a way to say, this is what's happening at this station. These are the potential developments that are on the way, that because you don't see construction doesn't mean that investment is not happening. And so mapping some of that information, I think we need to talk about what is happening behind the scenes. While we're still making the sausage, we should be doing some marketing that the sausage is coming. And so I think that us working together, coordinating better to ensure that we're all on the same page, right hand and left hand are in constant communication as we go out and sell where opportunities exist, and then where new projects are on the way for St. Louis. Perhaps it is showcasing all of the development that is around every station in the region that's already recent, already there, or it's on the way. That also allows communities to participate and to be engaged, but then also for developers, when they're looking for projects or looking for areas to make an investment, they want something that's on the horizon. So we want to make sure that we're talking about all the things that are to come that you cannot see with the natural eye. So I think it is conversation. And sometimes we're all under NDAs, and that's understandable. However, we can talk about the potential of this ABC company and what they have to offer that they're bringing to the region.
Thank you. Thank you. So, John, when you're looking at an investment or possible investments, how big of a role is transit on the list? And if so, why or why not? And what do we need in St. Louis to make it more appealing to an organization like yours for investment?
We first start with, working with a good developer, good development team that is getting us involved early in the project so that we can have a good understanding of what the development site, potential is and how we can fit into it. What we're looking for as we're working on projects, is that transportation. We're looking for sustainable developments, but also how it impacts the overall community in a way that we see as beneficial. We did a project up in Boston, Massachusetts. It was a renovation of a public housing project, and we've been involved in it in 10 years, phase after phase after phase. So we look to get involved in long-term projects. We'll do the one-off projects, but we also look to be involved on larger developments over a longer period of time, where you can actually bring in all these other things that people have been talking about to make it a better community for those that are living in the apartment project. So we're looking at transportation as a key component, as something that we are looking at, and we see it as a key area that we have to keep in mind as we look at the project. We'll occasionally look at the walk score, transit score, bike score, a website, just as a quick look at a region, site, or location. Just is this something that has a good mode of transportation for its residents? Because ultimately, that's what allows the project to lease up, is based upon having these attributes.
And John, you just led us into several questions that center around this that have come from our attendees. So as developers and from the investment side and from the public sector side, does the type of public transit matter when you're developing near transit? Is it more appealing for light rail or BRT or a bus transfer center? Is there a specific type of mode of public transit that is more appealing to as a development site, or are you looking for a highly utilized site and invested in? What is the key with regards to that public transit component that you're looking for?
I mean, it's regional. You have to look at what's happening in that region, because you're trying to figure out what is the best way that people can get to their jobs in a cost-effective way. So it really, what works in New York when we're building upon a transit center there, where we have no parking, to what would work in St. Louis is, you have to work with what you have there. And so we will look at it from a specific regional point of view and determine what makes most sense for that project in that location.
Developers, anyone else like to jump in on that question?
From our perspective, I don't know if there's a specific type that's more important than another. Obviously, a project for us like Swansea is a true TOD as we all understand it, where we work closely with Bi-State. It's using land that was once theirs and a lot of planning and partnership around that. We have two developments underway right now here in the region. One in Belleville, which is in downtown. It's an adaptive reuse of a historic building that was a hotel. Another one in South County in the Lee May neighborhood off of Telegraph, just a little north of 255. Both of these are senior properties. And there's a fixed route bus stop right in front of those, both of those locations. And, that's critical for us as well. It doesn't have all the gadgetry, if you will, of some of the other developments that we plan. But, we can tell you with confidence that those don't happen without those kind of resources available to the residents of both of those developments.
Great.
We also, I should also mention, the public sector's involvement is also critical, both for the affordable housing as well as to get some of these projects underway. If it's important to the public sector, generally they'll provide resources to help make that project move forward. Sometimes it's as simple as a tax abatement. or providing a grant fund to encourage the developers to develop near the transportation, which is good for the overall community. To have these developments near the main train centers for transit centers for for their region.
Great. So there is a question in our chat box, and I think it's a good opportunity. So we are lucky enough to have John Langa on this call with us today. He's the VP of Economic Development at Metro Transit. John, there's a question if you'd like to comment on Metro's perspective with regards to the long-term effects of the pandemic on Metrolink and the potential impacts on TOD in the future. I didn't know if you wanted to jump in at this point and say anything.
I think the infrastructure that we've got is we're learning just like the rest of the macroeconomic units across the country. What does it mean for office space? What does it mean for transit? What does it mean for people working together? I don't think what's going to happen today is the same thing that's going to be happening 18 months from now. We're all learning through this. So certainly across the country, mass transit has been impacted by COVID. I think that will change here with vaccinations, continued masking, et cetera. I think the real question is not for transit, but what is the economy coming up? Is it more linked to remote working? Will that continue that way? The other is there's a lot of jobs that don't work for remote working and may still be on transit, and we may have, I'll call additional enclave developments around transit because of that. So some people are looking at it as a calamity, others as an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity, and we're all going to learn here in the next 12 to 18 months. And in the meanwhile, we've got some developments back to those non-disclosures that Erica mentioned are just that. So I'm not seeing the developers stop around transit. They are continuing to show interest, and as well as their lenders. So we're moving forward.
Great. Thank you, John. So we have a two-part question for the panel. Do you believe, and John just touched on it a little bit, actually, you guys are doing very well at leading me into my next question, so I really appreciate that. Do you believe that the office sector will follow the same fate as brick and mortar from retail? And if not, how do you anticipate it will change? And the second part of the question is, how do you see the dedicated parking for offices change, if at all, as well, if we see this shift to more telework and choices like that?
I'll maybe touch on that a bit. We're finding in our office design and our office work that I think the question was brought up similar to the retail. I think what's happened to the retail side is that it really has come down to an experience, experience that you can't get. If you can get the same experience ordering something from Amazon as you can get by going to your local, superstore, that doesn't quite change your needs. But if you're going to find something and you're shopping and you're picking something out and you're learning about somebody or finding new things or supporting a local community, that's the thing that has found retail's continued, success on a more smaller and intimate scale. So we're finding that the office conversations have followed suit in a similar way. If I can, focused work, or if I can hold a meeting or check in with my team from home as I can from an office environment, those sorts of things may change, but it's not going to replace the collaboration, the getting together, the experience. You have to make the office environment in the future something that is, worth going to the office for, and being able to collaborate and connect in a way that you just can't do it in a virtual environment. The virtual it can do a lot, but it has its limits. And so we need to tailor our environments. We would find that our office spaces perhaps have less personal space, but more space to do different kinds of collaboration in different ways throughout the office. So the square footage may reduce, it may start to shift into utilization of other ways, you know, as we come out of this in the post-COVID era. You know, but again, it's our job to, as designers, to flex with that and to work with that, you know, whatever changes may come ahead.
Thank you. So over time, do you see project lenders being more receptive to reduce project parking requirements due to the close proximity of transit? And someone else in our chat box has added, are banks or insurance companies a barrier to lowering the amount of parking in TOD? So, you know, I know this parking comment is a hot button, so I'm just going to put it out there.
I mean, as an investor and lender, you know, we study it as part of the underwriting of the project. It's also going to be, we study and need to determine where retail that is part of, you know, the underwriting of a project, where that fits in post-COVID. It's, you know, with all the retail that has been shut down, it's part of your underwriting. So are you getting revenue from the parking, and do you have too much revenue that you're relying upon in order to make that deal successful? So it is something that we have to look at case by case, deal by deal. And the closer you are to public transportation, the more likelihood you are that you don't need as much parking. There might be one person in the household that needs a car, but the other may not need a car. So you don't need 2 spaces per unit. And that's something that we, you know, keep a, you know, close eye on. And we're always looking at comparables in the marketplace. So, you know, it's what are the other projects seeing as far as their parking ratios, and how many of those parking spaces in a particular multifamily development are actually utilized. So you don't want to over build the parking. It doesn't make sense. So it is something that the investors and lenders will take a look at on a case by case basis, in my view.
Does anyone else want to jump in on this one? Okay. Aaron, did you want to jump in?
Just to say that, you know, our belief is that the short answer to that is yes. In what we see is it varies by region. So I think the more successful models there are in the St. Louis region that show projects can work and the lender's not taking a market risk with lesser parking available, I think the fundamental thing is it becomes a lot easier to sell that to our bank and investor partners. And I think the project at Fuoss Park-DeBaliviere really is a good opportunity for anybody else thinking about a TOD to monitor how that one goes and use that as more informational kind of fodder to have that conversation with your financing partner.
Great, thank you. So next question. And I know we're getting close to our time, but we have a couple more questions, and I know you all have so much for others to learn from that. We want to make sure we have as much time as possible. But, you know, Citizens for Modern Transit views TOD as a real benefit for the region, not just for those using the system, but for the communities where these transit-oriented developments come up, and we see them as being successful. But the other part of transit-oriented development is that it can help drive ridership on our system, as well as we create places for people to go on transit and destinations. So what do we need in the St. Louis market from our elected officials to help move these projects forward? I know Joel touched on a little bit of the TOD overlay code at the Forest Park Station wasn't completely adopted. What are the other things that our electeds could do to help support this type of development that will not only drive economic opportunities, but potentially it will help to drive the success of the transit system itself? Anyone want to jump in?
I would say the short answer is they need John Lango, but that's an easy one. You know, if a lot of this, I think, depends on, you know, people's perspective of what the role of the city should do and their kind of functions, with that. Certainly identifying sites, understand when I talked about the form-based code before, understanding, that certain zoning restrictions shouldn't apply, could apply differently to these sorts of sites. Having sites ready for development. We live in an old city. There's a lot of previous development on some of these sites, and these things can be expensive when they get into it, and especially subgrade. Again, part of the parking issue at DeBaliviere site, going underground, is an expensive endeavor to create parking. And when you go underground, there's an opportunity for a lot of other surprises. So certainly identifying sites, having sites maybe development ready, cleaned up, and ready for that redevelopment to happen. One thing that we haven't quite touched on, the transit, mobility, we're going to have the planning of the brick line going from Forest Park to the Arch, I think is another consideration of transit in a recreational way that will be positive towards development, and this kind of stitch that's kind of going down the central corridor that hopefully brings some of these areas together better in a way that, we wouldn't have had as an opportunity 20 years ago. So, I feel that having the sites now along that stretch as well, being ready for additional development and the city being conducive to that, I think will help push the momentum of that movement in the future.
I agree, Joel. I think between the brick line and the economic development framework from SLDC, all are very complementary pieces that we should be paying attention to.
Okay, so one final question. How can we build off what we're seeing right now? Aaron's mid-sized development at the Swansea station, Joel and Jeff's development that is underway at the Forest Park station, some of the other TOD that we have in this region. How can we build off of that to create more opportunities for equitable and sustainable development near transit stops, whether that is bus or light rail? What is your one ingredient, key lesson that people can take away from this talk this morning that you think that we need to move these forward?
Prioritize community first.
Okay.
I would say amplify the power of the voice and the insight that residents have to tell you what they need, what they're interested in, what they're going to utilize. Not we will build it and they will come, or we go into community to say what the project is, build the project with the community.
Kim, if I could add from your last question into this question, I think something that's working very well is when the community views it as an entire corridor, not just one project, but an entire corridor. And somebody mentioned Swansea earlier, and it's remarkable what the village is doing there, where they are using this as a fulcrum to get to several next steps. I think that can work throughout the region, where it's not just that individual single project, but it kind of spiders out from there, a half mile, whatever that may be, but how to upgrade or change that entire corridor for the folks in the community, not just from that one project, but that larger effort for the folks in the community.
Momentum matters. I think that's what I'm hearing from John, and it builds that buzz that we've seen in so many different spaces. So that's important.
Yeah.
Right. Aaron, Joel, John Hanley, any last thoughts, lessons learned?
Just making sure that everyone's involved early in the process for, if it's a master plan site or a larger site, get everyone's input early, and that way things go much smoother as you go into it. And many of these projects aren't just one building, they are multiple buildings. So you're looking at it long term.
Great.
From our perspective, the The educational piece that so many other panelists that have touched on, I think, is also really important. To be able to meet with stakeholders and, you know, governmental officials, what have you, and explain the importance of these kind of developments, not just as a standalone, but as a strategic investment in the community that not only creates a good place to live, but helps the overall transit system, et cetera. And I think there's, you know, a coalition of people who can help carry those kind of messages to folks who aren't used to those concepts yet. And I think that the wider that gets spread to those kind of audiences in our region makes these things more possible.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I want to thank our panelists who have done an excellent job. This webinar is recorded, so we will be placing it on our website later on today with links to some of the projects that were discussed this morning. I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us for this conversation. Hopefully you have found it engaging and informative. We will post the video again to our social media channels as well for you to find it. If you are looking for other additional information about Citizens for Modern Transit or other projects that we're working on, please go to our website at cmt-stl.org. And the days and weeks ahead we know are going to be challenging, but what we have seen throughout the entire pandemic is whether you ride transit or not, it has been essential during this pandemic now more than ever. And so we really are looking for people to understand that and join CMT and continue us with our mission with us. So I want to thank you all for joining us. Everyone, please stay safe, and you can find additional information on our website shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and I do want to add thank you to ULI and REALTORS St. Louis for partnering. I'm so sorry I forgot that. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.